You guys ready for some spicy-ass opinions? I've been getting really intimately acquainted with Hollow Knight lately. Not necessarily because I'm bored or I have nothing to play. There's actually been a pretty steady release of games this year that I've really enjoyed. A couple of them I've even made videos on. But working on Firemoth as much as I have means a lot more hours I've had per day to just spend time with the game. Capture footage, test out features, constantly resize custom sprites because they keep growing outside the goddamn... How is it still cutting off? I changed it like 7 times! At least in some cases, absence really does make the heart grow fonder. With all the extra time I've plugged into my save files, just troubleshooting and balancing new things that have come up in the mod, I've also just been, playing it normally. Like, just enjoying the game, not with any mods on. And as I've been rediscovering an obsession for this game, I've also been discovering new playstyles and forming new opinions on things about the game I previously... Hey, no. Hey, sit down. Sit back down and wait your turn, okay? We're getting there. Don't rush me on this, all right? Wow, that's 2 bits in 1 intro, so fuck whatever I wanted to say next. I'm just gonna start. Study Buddy is a very unique charm, with a uniquely rewarding benefit when used in capable hands, i.e. not my own. I still have trouble clearing P5 if I go for more than a month or so without playing the game, apparently, but nevertheless, Study Buddy is one of those charms where I can see both sides of the argument. On one hand, the displacement of the knight no longer being there when you hit enemies, when combined with other charms like Quick Slash and Strength, can give you a massive DPS boost in more than a few situations. On the other hand, actually getting used to the charm requires a mildly discomforting learning phase when you're so used to holding forward to null the knockback that you end up headbutting enemies and dying for a few minutes. Maybe somewhere in another timeline, Study Buddy never even became a charm, and the whole idea of backwards momentum upon hitting an enemy just never existed in Hollow Knight to begin with. This was my line of reasoning for justifying my initial distaste for the charm, as the more I thought about it, the more I just felt like the charm's only purpose was to take away an inconvenience that was already baked into the game, and the subtraction of inconvenience doesn't always equate to convenience in my eyes. However, Study Buddy has been recognized by more advanced players for benefits that were often overlooked due to its uncomfortable learning curve. It doesn't sound like a lot at face value. The charm's one benefit is simply taking away the knockback when you hit enemies, and not until you actually try to get acquainted with the charm will you start realizing just how game-changing that benefit really is. And once you get past that weird transition into using it, you've become a step closer to taking advantage of what is one of the most broken recoil stabilizer buffs I think I've ever played with. Hollow Knight is a Metroidvania, obviously. And one of the most significant factors of a Metroidvania, at least mechanically speaking, will always be how it moves. When looking at it through that lens, Study Buddy suddenly has a lot more potential, because it allows you to take advantage of the game in a way that's much more significant. It gives you an advantage that's outside the realm of just increasing your damage per spell and calling it a day. Staying in place not only means you no longer have to press forward while attacking on the ground, but it allows you to keep up with the momentum of other enemies as well. But I think one of my favorite benefits of this charm is how radically it can change aerial combat. When hitting enemies in the air, you end up battling momentum in a lot of different directions. Not only are you being pulled down by gravity, but there's the added backwards momentum of your attack. And that's not even taking into account how far the enemy gets knocked back by that attack. Study Buddy makes it to where you can just eliminate one direction of momentum entirely and just not have to worry about it, turning even Radiance into quite the pushover depending on how you punish her attacks. Because compensating for both downwards and backwards momentum is a bit of a bitch when you're trying not to get lit up by ethereal space moth magic. There's this reputation survivability charms have garnered that I don't personally believe is really fair. Grub Song is among these charms for sure, mainly due to the charm's benefit only activating when the player takes damage. It's easy to just tell people not to get hit and equip every single damage boosting charm in the game, and if you're sinking thousands of hours into Hollow Knight practicing hitless Pantheon runs and killing modded bosses day in and day out, then yes, there's some merit to that strategy, I won't deny you that. But if you have certain charms in your build, some more advanced players will just believe this to be a set of training wheels that the average player never fully learned how to function without. And Grub Song is very much not that. It has an asking price of 1 notch, which already makes it pretty difficult to make a case against it because there's so little commitment behind it. Grub Song awards you 15 soul upon taking damage compared to the usual 11 you get from melee attacks. This amount actually increases by 10 when paired with the Elegy charm, but if you're looking for ways to make Elegy viable, I'm sad to say damage mitigation is likely the least of your problems. Yeah, spoiler alert, Elegy is nowhere on this list, by the way. Still, that's a whopping grand total of 25 soul awarded to you per hit taken. And if it weren't for the 4-notch commitment required to get that effect, I'd say this teeters just on the edge of broken. This essentially means that you can have Spell Twister equipped in tandem, and you can literally have a spell ready every time you take any damage at all. Even without the added benefits of the Elegy charm, 15 soul is still pretty significant nonetheless, and it can be especially helpful against bosses that don't give soul when you hit them, the Collector and Failed Champion for instance. This charm doesn't exactly have a reputation for being bad, but it does have a reputation for offering cheap support. And although I can see why, there's much more benefits this charm can give you outside of just receiving comeuppance because you aren't confident enough to kill a boss without getting hit or something. This charm is used by beginners and speedrunners alike, albeit for different reasons. A lot of Pantheon speedrunners will actually intentionally damage themselves on attacks and hazards and whatnot, so they can punish enemy attacks more severely during a more significant phase of the battle. That being said, pretty useless in Radiant boss fights for obvious reasons. Shape of Un is a surprisingly flexible charm that has uses in both committed survival builds and all on its own. Due to the charm's whimsical appearance, namely the fact that you turn into a little slug baby during the healing animation, it's really easy to think this charm offers very little benefit outside of just being gimmicky and cute to look at. However, the ability to displace yourself while healing in some fights against bosses can be really handy, and doubly so against faster bosses that leave little room for healing such as NKG and Pure Vessel. Un is a charm where a lot of its potential revolves around the right build, and luckily the game is nice enough to give the player visual interactions when certain charms are equipped, seeming to suggest that said charms are really effective when used in tandem with each other. The secret to using Un correctly is to know the type of attack it can heal through. Being able to move while healing doesn't guarantee you a heal every single time you use it, and although the benefit is invaluable in certain fights, there are much more tactics enemies use that it just can't defend against. The two most important things about Shape of Un is that it lets you move horizontally while healing, and it decreases the size of the knight's hitbox by a surprisingly significant amount. It's very easy to move yourself out of the way of NKG's spike attack, one, because there's that slight delay that allows the player to respond to them, and two, because the attack is majorly vertical. Same goes for Pure Vessel's own spike attack, and if you're really stretching your advantages, perhaps even projectiles from Hive Knight or Lost Kin's dive. The decreased hitbox size allows you to duck under attacks that do travel horizontally but aren't quite close enough to the ground to be a danger to you. Examples include NKG's Flame Bat attack, Crystal Guardian's laser, White Defender's shitballs, and even the dash attacks of some bosses like Mantis Lords. As invaluable as this can be in some fights, my only real complaint with this charm is that this advantage creates a pretty glaring inconsistency that ultimately undermines the charm's potential and makes it not nearly as useful as it could be. Let's take Shio's Yellow Paint Streak attack for instance. You can clear the entire body of a Mantis by just ducking under the attack, so it seems like this paint streak can be exploited in the same way, yet it can't. Despite not even getting close to the ground, the hitbox is just barely enough to catch you mid-animation and interrupt the heal. I didn't like Dashmaster when I first played the game. I don't think anyone did. Actually, no, I liked Dashmaster for my very first playthrough because of how quickly it made traveling and backtracking, and then immediately started disliking it once I just fuck you fucking. This was a huge problem with the charm for a long time. It seemed as though when using the charm in midair, accidentally so much as gliding your finger across the wrong key meant launching yourself in a completely different direction than intended, sometimes even resulting in unnecessary damage. And then everything changed when the 1.5 nation attacked, and now Dashmaster has been programmed in a way that also gives priority to the player's intended direction by reading whatever button is pressed first. So as long as you're pressing the direction you want to dash, it's not going to matter if you accidentally press down after the fact, because the game is still going to take your first input and read it as the intended direction. This makes Dashmaster a whole hell of a lot better, actually. It was this one little change that ended up turning Dashmaster into an incredibly powerful platforming tool. It's now much easier to refresh your dash by nail pogoing, because you can still press down to properly pogo off of something while running into far less complications than you otherwise would have. Dashmaster is now a charm that I can actually recommend for clearing some of the game's endgame platforming sections, and even the famed Path of Pain, that's not a sentence I ever thought would be making it onto a script. Really? What? As I stand before you today, I am actually recommending Dashmaster for platforming. Damn, what is this timeline? Outside of its precision benefits it gives you during platforming sections, it's still just a really convenient speed boost. It uses 2 charm notches, and I'll argue that it would possibly see much more respect from others as a charm if it only used 1, but if I'm just working on getting from point A to point B, I'm probably not going to be packing around an in-game P5 build with me at that time anyways, so even with the 2-notch commitment, it still offers convenience that's a pretty good deal above its asking price. You know what? I'm fucking sorry, okay? I have no arguments for why this charm is good, I just like using it, okay? No, I'm not gonna let this one go. I've had it up to my ass with these naysayers shit-talking my void baby. You ever just launch yourself at something so hard it fucking explodes? Boom! Damn! But that's not all. Combine your powers with Dash Master for marvelous results. 50% more damage, 100% more badass. Death from above, bitch ass. AC 130 inbound, motherfucker. Feel like doing some P5 runs with a nail binding? Guess what? Sharp Shadow's damage doesn't change. So what if it makes platforming awkward? You're fucking bad anyway. Sharp Shadow. Stay a cut above your competition, bitch. Baldur Shell isn't good. I'm not mincing words. I'm just gonna get that out of the way as soon as I can so I'm not miscommunicating anything. But it is another one of those charms I think that constantly gets used for the wrong reasons. Because it offers you extra insurance by preventing you from taking damage if you get hit during healing, it's very easy to just dismiss this charm as another training wheel that you'll only ever use on a first playthrough. The problem with Baldur Shell is with that extra barrier between you and getting hit, players can end up healing where it's not recommended. And they'll likely heal with a little less caution because of that safety net. And as soon as the shell breaks, it's useless, and you aren't getting those uses back until you sit at a bench somewhere, making the charm much more valuable during boss fights. You won't be finding much use for Baldur Shell in the base game, if I'm being honest. I personally think the benefits Baldur Shell gives you are much more valuable if you aren't using it with the intent to heal, but instead to block damage. Damage that would otherwise be unavoidable if your Shadow Dash is on cooldown and Desolate Dive might take too long to wind up. This is especially useful against bosses who hit fast, bosses that deal double damage, and even more so when we get into Radiant boss territory. When you start thinking of Baldur Shell more like a shield and less like healing insurance, I think that's when you start exploring the charm's benefits a little more thoroughly. I see a lot of newer players constantly asking what some of the differences are between Soul Catcher and Eater charms versus the Spell Twister charm. On the surface, it seems like they both achieve the same end result in different ways, which is just more soul. But which charm you should select should ultimately depend on what you plan to be using that soul for. Spell Twister reduces the cost of spell casting, but keeps the cost of healing at 33, leaving charms like Soul Catcher and Soul Eater to be more suited for survivability, whereas Spell Twister prioritizes more spells, as it's aptly named. But that said, if you're using one of these, chances are you'll be using another as well, as it's not like these benefits don't stack together. Spell Twister provides a surprising amount of advantages despite being only worth 2 notches, and I feel like this charm gets dismissed a lot because players interpret their functions to be largely the same, and thus dismiss Spell Twister as just a shittier, more complicated Soul Catcher. These charms are completely different in both function and in the advantages they give you. At 24 soul per spell, that's 4 spells you can cast in quick succession as opposed to the usual 3. That's a total of 8 spells if you're completely topped out, with a slight recharge delay once your main vessel is depleted. It basically prevents you from needing to fight through that delay after spell 3, and that extra burst damage can really count. Not only is this charm routinely overlooked due to it not appearing as useful as it actually is, but I would possibly even argue it's just as much of a necessity in soul builds as Shaman Stone. And even if you're ignoring the burst damage potential, lowering the cast threshold to 24 can still be incredibly useful in fights where soul collection is already scarce enough. It's just as useful in the early game as it is in Pantheon speedruns. It's almost never an undesirable option. The amount of spells per boss fight can just skyrocket, and the advantages are way too good for me to dismiss as being functionally synonymous with Soul Catcher. Like, it's just not even in the same tier. I still strongly dislike this charm, just because, as a concept, I don't think I ever won't. I've never had a particular taste for buffs that require the player to intentionally or unintentionally put themselves at a disadvantage first, only to reap inconsistent benefits. But I'm trying to approach this video with a bit of objectivity, so voicing a strong personal stance and saying between this and toilet paper I would wipe my ass with this charm first isn't really in good fairness. Because the truth is, Carefree Melody is actually really good. It's probably one of the greatest charms. when it feels like it. Carefree Melody has an average chance of 22.4% to protect you from an instance of damage. Of course, it starts off at 0, but each hit you take increases the likelihood of blocking by 10%, at least up to the 4th hit, which actually increases it by an extra 20%. When the effect activates, the counter resets to 0, and if you're somehow unlucky enough to take damage 7 times in a row, the effect can go all the way up to 90%. So pretty much you're guaranteed at least another mask or 2 of health in most in-game boss fights. I can honestly see the value in this. I can see a lot of it. Players can intentionally take damage and heal it up before a boss so that the effect will activate much sooner than it does. Even if it is up to chance, there are ways to make that chance work for you in some ways. But the problem comes in when you expect the charm to do any heavy lifting by itself. It can result in some pretty amazing survivability with other charms while not being particularly outstanding on its own. This should never be the linchpin of any build. Using it with Baller Shell is almost broken in some ways because the charm's counter still increases from hits taken to the shell, allowing you to tip the scales of chance very, very heavily in your favor. It's a 5-notch commitment, sure, but it'll be next to impossible for any Radiant boss to one-shot you at that point, so I'd say it's more than worth it in at least a couple of ways. It makes me a little sad. I wish I had more respect for this charm because I can see how it's useful. I just don't think it'll ever ring a personal note for me because 3 notches is a pretty steep asking price for a charm that only shows up to work 22% of the time. Nailmaster's Glory is already well enough respected by lots of more advanced players and speedrunners in the community, but I would still make the argument that it's a little on the underappreciated side. Not because there's some hidden secret benefit outside of what the charm already gives you, but because advanced players and speedrunners are the only ones I see taking consistent advantage of this charm. I feel like there are players out there who don't really give it a chance and actually use it for a while and see if they can get used to it. It doesn't do things you would half expect it to, like scale with strength, but that doesn't mean it can't be as versatile as it is. Nailmaster's Glory, at the cost of a single charm notch, cuts down the wind-up time for nail arts by literally almost half. That's fucking insane. I'm not going to pretend it should be your guiding light 100% of the time against 100% of the bosses, and honestly, with most early bosses, you really are just better off hitting them and casting spells and doing whatever you'd normally do. The key to Nailmaster's Glory is taking advantage of incredibly short action windows you have between an enemy's attacks, and punishing certain attacks that you normally wouldn't be able to. If you're fighting NKG, Soul Tyrant, GPZ, or other bosses that don't spend a lot of time being easy to keep up with, you have to be as opportunistic as you can when those windows of downtime are open. At least in my opinion, there isn't a charm I can think of that leans into that playstyle more than Nailmaster's Glory. I always feel a little weird arguing a case for charms like these, because the game has been out for so long, and feats that were previously thought impossible have been beaten so many times that we've resorted to making our own challenges so the time can pass by just a little bit quicker. And it's to the point where the only way we ever rank a charm anymore is by how good it is in boss fights. Sprint Master is a dangerous charm. It's a dangerous charm because once you get used to moving just a little faster, you're almost going to feel bored just walking and playing through at a regular pace again. It's a little bit of speed that helps you follow bosses just a little bit more. You get to and from areas and run away from your problems just a little bit quicker. It certainly doesn't do any heavy lifting combat-wise, nor does it really pretend to. It even has a unique charm interaction with Dash Master that even further increases the speed bonus, just to make sure you're using it correctly. That said, I'm saying this charm is underrated. I didn't say it was good. It's often overlooked and sometimes dismissed altogether just because the benefits don't look significant on paper. I don't really know, maybe my brain is just naturally predisposed to a high bar of stimulus and I can't help but be drawn to speed buffs. Maybe I just like when night goes zoom, and that's all there is to it. The only thing I know is I've played with this charm on for so long that I dread the day where I need to take it off for something, and my long overdue consequences finally catch up with me. I'm literally running away from my own accountability. Oh, and Weaverlings also run faster and jump higher when you have this on too. So that's cool.